Welcome, listeners, to the Way of Hermes. I'm Jake, and joining me today is Emily. We're excited to dive into a fascinating topic that's both ancient and surprisingly relevant to our modern lives.
That's right, Jake. Today we're exploring the Way of Hermes, a contemporary spiritual path with deep roots in ancient wisdom. It's a journey that promises to be both enlightening and transformative.
The Way of Hermes, also known as Hermeticism, is more than just a philosophical concept. It's a practical approach to life that focuses on healing the soul and expanding our consciousness. But before we delve deeper, Emily, could you give our listeners a brief overview of what the Way of Hermes is all about?
Of course, Jake. The Way of Hermes is a spiritual path that celebrates life and light. At its core, it's about freeing ourselves from negative influences that hold us back. Things like fear, aggression, and limiting beliefs. The ultimate goal is to open our eyes to the true beauty of existence.
It's interesting how this ancient wisdom seems so applicable to our modern lives. Many of us are constantly battling stress, anxiety, and negativity. The idea of a path that can help us overcome these challenges is quite appealing.
And what's fascinating is that while the Way of Hermes has ancient roots, it's very much a contemporary spiritual path. It's not about adhering to rigid dogmas or rituals, but about personal transformation and growth.
I'm curious, Emily. How does one actually practice the Way of Hermes in daily life? Can you give our listeners an example?
Practitioners often engage in meditation and contemplation, focusing on understanding their own thoughts and emotions. This self-awareness is the first step in healing the soul and freeing it from negative influences.
That makes sense. It's like the ancient Greek maxim, know thyself, right? But I imagine there's more to it than just meditation.
Another important aspect is the study of Hermetic texts and principles. These teachings provide insights into the nature of reality, the divine, and our place in the cosmos. By understanding these concepts, practitioners can shift their perspective and begin to see the interconnectedness of all things.
It sounds like the Way of Hermes offers a holistic approach to personal growth and spiritual development. In our fast-paced, often cynical world, how does this ancient wisdom remain relevant?
I think the relevance lies in its focus on inner transformation. In a world where we're often looking for external solutions to our problems, the Way of Hermes encourages us to look within. It teaches that true change and happiness come from understanding ourselves and our connection to the universe.
I can see how that would be appealing to many people today. We're often so caught up in the external world that we neglect our inner lives. The Way of Hermes seems to offer a balance.
And what's particularly interesting is how the Way of Hermes approaches the concept of fate and free will. This brings us to one of the key Hermetic texts, the Asclepius, which offers some profound insights on this topic.
Can you tell us more about what the Asclepius says about fate?
Well, Jake, the Asclepius presents a fascinating perspective on fate, or Hermene, as it's called in Greek. It's not a simple concept of predestination, but rather a complex interplay of forces that govern the cosmos.
That sounds pretty deep. Can you break it down for our listeners? How does the Asclepius describe these forces?
Certainly. The text proposes a tripartition of causal forces: fate, necessity, and order. These three forces work together to maintain the structure and function of the universe.
So it's not just one overarching force of fate, but a combination of different elements. How do these forces interact?
Well, according to Hermes in the Asclepius, Hermes is like the initial seed that gives birth to all future events. Necessity then acts as a constraining force, compelling these events into creation. Finally, order maintains the weaving of these things that Hermes and necessity have set in motion.
Wow, that's quite a system. It almost sounds like a cosmic assembly line. But where does divine will fit into all of this?
The Asclepius actually describes these three forces, Hermes, necessity, and order, as effects of God's will. They're seen as manifestations of divine law and reason.
So in essence, these forces are carrying out a divine plan. That seems to leave little room for free will or chance.
It might seem that way at first, but the Hermetic view is more nuanced. While these forces create a framework of order, The text also mentions that accident and chance are mixed into all worldly things. It's a delicate balance between determinism and unpredictability.
It sounds like the Hermetic view tries to reconcile the idea of an ordered universe with the unpredictability we experience in our daily lives. How does this concept of fate relate to human actions and decisions?
Well, Jake, that's where it gets really interesting. The Asclepius doesn't focus much on human free will in the way we might expect. Instead, it emphasizes our unique role within this cosmic order. Humans are seen as having a special place because we're gifted with divine reason, or logos.
So, our ability to reason is what sets us apart. How does that tie into the concept of fate?
Exactly. Our capacity for reason is seen as a divine gift that allows us to understand and interact with these cosmic forces. It's not so much about defying fate as it is about aligning ourselves with the divine order through understanding and wisdom.
It seems to shift the focus from trying to control external events to cultivating inner wisdom and understanding. How might this view impact someone practicing the Way of Hermes today?
For modern practitioners of the Way of Hermes, this understanding of fate can be truly transformative. It encourages us to see ourselves as active participants in a grand cosmic order, rather than passive victims of circumstance.
How does this relate to the terrestrial gods mentioned in the Asclepius? Can you elaborate on their role in this cosmic framework?
The Asclepius describes terrestrial gods as playing a crucial role in the mechanism of fate and its interaction with humanity. These gods are seen as intermediaries between the celestial realm and our earthly existence.
Intermediaries. That's intriguing. How exactly do these terrestrial gods interact with humans?
Well, according to the text, these terrestrial gods offer help to humans in various ways. They're described as caring about details, predicting the future through divination, and providing assistance to humanity. It's almost like they're cosmic helpers, each with their own specific domain.
It sounds like a very different view from the distant, uninvolved deities we often hear about in other ancient philosophies. How does this idea of involved terrestrial gods fit with the concept of fate we discussed earlier?
The Asclepius emphasizes that the actions of these terrestrial gods are not random or by chance. Instead, they're part of the divine order we talked about earlier. They operate within the framework of fate, necessity, and order, but they provide a more personal, accessible interface for human interaction with these cosmic forces.
So it's like these terrestrial gods are the local representatives of the cosmic order, working within the rules of fate, but able to interact more directly with humans. There were some Greek fragments that shed more light on the Hermetic concept of fate. Can you tell us more about that?
These fragments come from John Lydas, a 6th century Byzantine administrator and writer. He provides us with some additional Greek text from the Perfect Discourse, which is the Greek original of the Asclepius.
What do these fragments reveal about the Hermetic concept of fate?
Well, in these fragments, fate is described in a few intriguing ways. It's called the fated activity, or even God himself. It's also described as the order that follows after God, joined with necessity, and spread throughout all things in heaven and on earth.
That's quite a complex definition. It seems to blur the lines between fate, divine will, and the structure of the cosmos itself. How does this align with what we see in the Latin Asclepius?
It aligns quite closely, Jake. In both versions, we see fate portrayed not as a blind, impersonal force, but as an integral part of divine order. The Greek fragments reinforce the idea that fate, or hymarmene, is intimately connected with divine activity and the structure of the universe.
This is really deepening our understanding of the Hermetic view. It seems like fate, in this tradition, is far more than just predestination. It's a complex interplay of divine will, cosmic order, and even chance.
But there's another fascinating aspect of Hermetic thought that we haven't touched on yet, the distinction between intelligible and sensible gods.
Intelligible and sensible gods. That sounds intriguing, Emily. Can you break that down for our listeners?
In Hermetic thought, there's a clear distinction made between intelligible gods and sensible gods. The intelligible gods are described as principles of all forms. They're abstract, conceptual deities that can only be apprehended by the mind. On the other hand, sensible gods are described as principles of substance. These are deities that can be perceived by our physical senses and are associated with particular domains in the material world.
It's almost like a bridge between abstract cosmic principles and the tangible world we experience. How do these different types of gods relate to the concept of fate we've been discussing?
This is where the concept of ausiarchs comes into play. An ausarch in Hermetic thought is a kind of ruler or principle that governs a particular domain of existence. The Asclepius mentions that Jupiter, for instance, is the ausiarch that rules over heaven. The sun has light as its ausiarch. But what's really interesting is how this relates to fate. The text mentions that the 7 planetary spheres have ausiarchs called Fortuna and Heimarmena, fortune and fate.
So these ausiarchs are like cosmic administrators, each responsible for their own domain, and fate itself is one of these administrators.
That's a great way to put it, Jake. These ausiarchs, including fate, are described as changing all things according to natural law and a fixed order. It's a beautiful illustration of how the Hermetic worldview integrates concepts of change and stability, fate, and natural law.
This is really painting a complex picture of the cosmos, Emily. It seems like the Hermetic view sees the universe as this intricate system of abstract principles and tangible forces, all working together in a divine order. How does this understanding impact the way a Hermetic practitioner might approach their daily life?
For a Hermetic practitioner, understanding these principles isn't just an intellectual exercise. It's a way of aligning oneself with the divine order. By understanding the roles of these various cosmic forces, the intelligible and sensible gods, the ausiarchs, fate, and natural law, a practitioner of the Way of Hermes can strive to live in harmony with the divine order. It's about recognizing our place in this grand cosmic scheme and acting accordingly.
It seems like this perspective could bring a sense of purpose and meaning to one's life, seeing everything as part of this divine cosmic order. How does this relate to the concept of personal transformation that we mentioned earlier, is so central to the Way of Hermes?
You've hit on a crucial point. The Hermetic concept of personal transformation is deeply intertwined with this cosmic understanding. At the heart of this transformation is the concept of new, which is central to Hermetic thought.
Can you elaborate on what new means in the Hermetic context?
In Hermetic philosophy, new is often described as the divine intellect or mind. It's seen as the highest aspect of human consciousness and serves as a direct link to the divine.
How does this concept of new relate to the everyday life of someone practicing the Way of Hermes?
Well, new is seen as the principle that enables humans to grasp eternal truths and divine realities. It's through new that individuals can achieve gnosis, a deep, experiential knowledge of the divine that's central to the Hermetic path.
So new is like a tool for spiritual understanding. That's fascinating. How does this concept of new fit into the larger cosmic order we've been discussing?
In Hermetic thought, nous isn't just a part of human consciousness. It's also seen as the creative force behind the cosmos. It's the divine intellect that orders and sustains the universe according to divine wisdom. For a modern Hermetic practitioner, cultivating nous is about developing a higher level of consciousness. This might involve practices like meditation, contemplation of Hermetic texts, or exercises designed to expand one's awareness beyond the material world.
It sounds like developing new could be a lifelong journey. How does this concept of new relate back to the ideas of fate and cosmic order we discussed earlier?
Nous as the divine intellect is intimately connected with the cosmic order. By developing our nous, we're essentially aligning ourselves more closely with the divine mind that orchestrates the cosmos, including the workings of fate. And what's particularly fascinating is how this concept of nous ties into the Hermetic view of human potential. In Hermetic thought, humans have a unique place in the cosmos because of our capacity for nous.
It seems like the Way of Hermes sees humans not just as subject to cosmic forces, but as active participants in the divine order.
For a Hermeticist, challenges aren't just random occurrences or punishments, but opportunities for growth and alignment with the divine order. By cultivating nous, practitioners aim to see beyond surface-level difficulties to understand the deeper cosmic patterns at play.
Can you tell us more about the Hermetic Perfect Discourse and its various translations?
The Hermetic Perfect Discourse, also known as Logos Teleios in Greek, is a fascinating text with a rich history. While it was originally written in Greek, it's best known today through its Latin translation called the Asclepius.
So the text we've been discussing, the Asclepius, is actually a translation. How widely known was the original Greek version?
The Greek version was quite popular in its time, Jake. It was quoted by notable figures like Lactantius and Stobaeus. However, it's the Latin translation that gained more widespread recognition, especially among later Latin authors like Augustine.
It seems like this text had quite a journey through different languages and cultures. Were there any other significant translations or versions?
Interestingly, an extensive excerpt in Coptic was discovered detailing the postmortem fate of the soul and what's known as the Egyptian apocalypse. This Coptic version was found in the Nag Hammadi Codex VI.
That's quite a linguistic journey for this text. How do these different versions compare to each other?
The textual evidence shows considerable overlap between the Latin, Greek, and Coptic versions. Interestingly, the Coptic version seems to align more closely with the Greek than the Latin does, which suggests some evolution or instability in the text over time.
It's amazing how these ancient texts can provide such a window into the past. Given these different versions and translations, how do scholars approach the complexities of interpreting the Hermetic teachings on fate?
The concept of fate in the Asclepius is indeed complex, and there are several factors that contribute to this complexity. For one, it's important to note that there isn't a single unified Hermetic doctrine of fate. The Hermetic literature was produced by multiple authors, possibly from various religious circles.
So we're dealing with a diversity of perspectives even within the Hermetic tradition itself. That must make interpretation challenging.
And to add to that complexity, the terminology of fate and necessity is often conflated and confused in ancient philosophical and mystical sources. The Asclepius is no exception to this. Scholars have to carefully navigate these nuances when interpreting the text.
It sounds like studying these texts requires a real depth of understanding across multiple disciplines. Emily, given all these complexities, what do you think is the key takeaway for our listeners about the Hermetic teachings on fate?
I think the key takeaway, Jake, is that the Hermetic view of fate is far more nuanced and complex than a simple notion of predestination. It's interwoven with concepts of divine will, cosmic order, and human potential. For those practicing the Way of Hermes today, it offers a rich framework for understanding our place in the universe and our potential for growth and transformation.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Hermetic Dialogues, the official podcast of the Way of Hermes website. If you are interested in free articles on Hermeticism and related topics or want to study this ancient tradition through our online course, be sure to visit our website at wayofhermes.com.